Who is the most wacky person to ever be in number 10 as British Prime Minister? I don't mean in the last decade, although that's already a pretty decent list, but ever. Let's go back hundreds of years. Who was the person who was the most completely out of their depth? Let's be honest, it's a slam dunk, isn't it? It's obviously Liz Truss, Prime Minister for a whole 50 days. But as bad as Truss has been so far in her political career, from eulogizing cheese to being in a Mexican standoff with a lettuce, she seems to be just getting weirder. Today, she appeared at a Bitcoin conference in Bedford called Cheat Code, and she started by offering this diagnosis about the challenges facing the West.
What is the scale of the problem we're facing here in the West?
So the book is called 10 Years to Save the West. And what I am saying is unless we get a grip and change the way our countries work, the West will be finished in 10 years. And what do I mean by that? I mean, we have been threatened by left-wing ideology, whether it's excessive government spending, whether it's net zero ideology, whether it's things like DEI and ESG, whether it's Islamism. All of these things have conspired to hollow out our countries, to stagnate our growth, but also to present real threats to the way of life in the West. And I am a Trump supporter. I think that Trump getting elected last year was the first domino to be falling in the right direction in terms of saving the West, because otherwise I think that we will see China and radical Islam, two terrible partners, win against the West. That is the threat we face.
Two terrible partners. China has waged a domestic struggle against radical Islam in Xinjiang province. You can say they went too far, they interned lots of people, etc. I'm not commenting on that. They had tremendous problems with radical Islam in that region, many documented terrorist atrocities, and they responded. And now you're saying that they're somehow partners. I mean, this just sounds conspiratorial, doesn't it? China and radical Islam, China, which is overwhelmingly not Islamic, and radical Islam are coming after the West. And she's saying this at a Bitcoin conference in Bedford. Anyway, Truss continued by outlining some of these specific problems facing the United Kingdom.
We're living in a country where things are deteriorating. It's a country in decline. Our towns and cities aren't what they were. We're seeing rising crime. We're seeing industry decimated. I mean, MPs have just been recalled to Parliament this weekend to renationalise the steel industry because it's uneconomic. So all of those things that, and we were the country that invented steel. We invented the blast furnace, and yet these things are being closed down. So what I am saying is the fundamentals that made our society and our economy great have been jettisoned in order to pursue some very, very dubious ideology. And we've seen it in transgender extremism. We've seen it in the rise of the size of government. We've seen it in things like net zero. And it has got to a stage now where it is damaging our society from within.
We lost industry. When did we lose industry, Liz? We lost industry during the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s. Most of it was under Margaret Thatcher's watch. She actively sought to deindustrialize the country. That's just the markets. Suck it up. Manufacturing and production can relocate. That's just the markets. Well, do you like the markets or don't you? Because capitalists want to maximize their returns. They want to minimize their costs. They will relocate production to China if they can get away with it, or to Vietnam, or to Bangladesh. Do you like capitalism or not? People seek better returns. They want a return on investment. They want to make a profit. That's literally what this system is. And by the way, if they don't do that and competitors do that, they go out of business. And then worst of all, they become working class. That is the iron law of capitalism, is competition. So if I don't do that thing and other people do, then I'm a goner. That's what destroyed industry in this country, was the spatial fix of relocation to other parts of the world, besides other things, which, by the way, as I've said, overwhelmingly happens under the watch of Margaret Thatcher. But apparently it's the woke left, and it's trans people, and it's net zero, which has destroyed industry in this country. I mean, this is a remarkable statistic. In 1997, Britain still manufactured, it still produced more cars than China as recently as 1997. So even after all the Thatcher stuff. But we didn't take industry seriously because as a society, our political class, our media told us that's not really important anymore. What you're meant to do is serve lattes and work in legal services and work on computers and design widgets. And actually, that's where real value is in the 21st century. You're moving up the commodity chain. Don't make steel and cement and fertilizer and chemical products. No, serve Starbucks. That's really kicking on. That's making progress. That was the myth that was sold to us by neoliberalism, not the left. And next up, Truss moved on to free speech, where she said this.
There is a huge problem with free speech, and people are being put in jail for X posts, but they're not being put in jail for looking at child pornography. I mean, it's an extraordinary double standard, two-tier system that we now have. What I also worry about is the way that stories are suppressed or promoted. So recently we've seen the promotion of the documentary, or not a documentary, the show Adolescence. I haven't watched it, but we've seen the promotion of that, the asking questions about that. And we've seen the whole issue of the grooming gangs suppressed and mainstream media not really covering it, only covering it very partially. So what you can see is there's a real push to promote certain ideas and also suppress certain ideas and to stop people saying what they think, which I think is incredibly dangerous in a democracy. And we can see this not just happening in Britain, but it's happening across Europe, with trying to deny people running in elections, trying to close down TV channels. And this is the kind of thing that we used to see going on in the Soviet Union, and it's now happening to us. And it is absolutely shocking that that is the case in modern Britain.
So some guy is barred, by the way, I disagreed with that. Some guy is barred from running as a presidential candidate, I believe, in Romania. And that's the case in modern Britain. We're just like the Soviet Union because people are watching Adolescence, a Netflix show. We're just like the Soviet Union. It's just like Andropov, or maybe Khrushchev, because there's this show on Netflix I don't particularly like. And the media aren't covering the grooming scandal, really. The Times, the Mail, the Sun, the BBC, GB News, Sky News. There's been multiple government commissions, most recently in 2022. 20 recommendations were made by that most recent commission. 20 recommendations. How many do you think were implemented by the Tories in the following 2 years while they were still in government? Out of 20 recommendations, 0. The government that Liz Truss was in, her party. But nobody's talking about it. We were talking about it so much. There was a commission. You did nothing about the recommendations. But nobody's talking about it. And going back to steel, we invented steel. Henry Bessemer creates the process for modern steel in the 19th century. Correct. Steel is first produced by India about 2,000 years ago. It's called Voot steel. Very impressive. I bet she doesn't even know that. Anyway, there's a fact for you. So what answer does Truss have to these new threats to free speech in the UK? Of course, beyond cancelling her Netflix subscription. Well, here's what she said next, and you'll want to pay attention here because it's really, really odd.
There are too many people who are just accepting it, and I do think this needs to be actively fought. And what I am doing is establishing a new free speech network, which will be uncensored and uncancelable, to actually talk about the issues people don't want to talk about. Another example is Bitcoin. You won't see much coverage of Bitcoin in the mainstream media. You won't see it being raised in Parliament to any great extent. You won't see it being discussed, on the main economics programs, even though there is a huge Bitcoin movement. And it is an attempt to set guardrails about what it's acceptable to talk about and what it's not acceptable to talk about. And we've got to break out of that. We're planning to launch it in the summer of this year. There will be more news about it fairly soon. I can't say any more at this stage.
We're all on tenterhooks, Liz. We can't wait for a new free speech network which discusses the standard talking points of Britain's biggest newspapers and which even dares to mention Bitcoin, that thing that nobody has ever heard of before because there's a total media blackout. What is Bitcoin? Well, you wouldn't know if Liz Truss wasn't talking about it at this conference in Bedford. Kieran, I know I'm sort of joking, and she is a joke figure, okay? I think it's important to take people you disagree with seriously, but she's a joke. She speaks in a more sophisticated, restrained way, but Liz Truss is basically Britain's Alex Jones.
I honestly don't know where to start. Aaron. I mean, is she Alex Jones? I don't know. She's definitely a shapeshifter. She's definitely an ambulance chaser. You can measure, I suppose, the quality of the post-prime ministerial career by how effective, not good, but effective they were when they were in Downing Street. Tony Blair has his gilded lecture circuit. Gordon Brown has his, widely disseminated media junkets. David Cameron has his shepherd's hut. Liz Truss has Bitcoin festival or whatever it is in Bedford. It's difficult to actually think of anything. Genuinely, you could go line by line, everything she said, and find very good reasons why she's a massive hypocrite and why everything she said is completely contradicted by the example of her entire career. But the problem is that's even engaging in that kind of discussion is to take her too seriously as an individual. That's why I started by saying she is an ambulance chaser. She was, whatever happened to her in government, she was defenestrated, and now she needs to reinvent herself. And because she's, sorry, but, deeply unintelligent and unserious, she's kind of sidling around the fringes of what she thinks is going to be the new centre of power, or the exciting new centre of power. But she's not doing it very well because it's Liz Truss. But, just take two examples. I mean, hearing her bleat about the condition of the world, the condition of Britain, after she was in successive, multiple governments over 14 years and was maybe not the architect, because I don't think she's ever been the architect of anything, but certainly co-author of many of the decisions that will have created the conditions she's moaning about now. And then, of course, blaming it on, as usual, the most marginalised people in society. So it wasn't me in government for 14 years that you ought to be blaming for all of these things that are a direct consequence of things that happened when I was in government. It's all the people that you're used to being angry at. There's a news channel that I sometimes go on that shall remain nameless. And the thing I always say to them in that studio is, not to the audience, but to the people who present the show, you are blaming the wrong people in order to protect the right people. In other words, you're blaming trans people, you're blaming migrants, you're blaming refugees, the most marginalised of essentially powerless people in Britain, in order to protect billionaires and the people who are the genuine architects of British society. I actually, to an extent, and this is something I guess in her favour, I genuinely don't know. And by the way, when they're doing it on this news channel, invariably they know they're doing it, I think. They know what they're doing. They know that that's what they're doing. In Liz Truss's case, I'm not sure that she does. I genuinely don't know that she realises that she's able to connect the dots in that way. And just briefly, I'll end on this. We mentioned Anthony Eden earlier. I think, if I'm throwing in my 2 cents, Aaron, she's the joint worst prime minister of the past 100 years, along with Anthony Eden. Both of them were fundamentally meaningless characters, but they did one massive cataclysmic thing before they left their relatively short time in government. So they stung like a bee and died.